I liked being a farmer. It was so incredibly different from the life I had been living for the decade or so before. It was slower, of course, but it was quiet and lovely and everything I needed at that point in my life. I had lived fast, speeding through my life like a bullet, not caring about the target. I barreled through the air at 1,000 miles an hour and loved every second of it. But for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? So eventually, I hit the target. Bam! Bull's fucking eye. The target was a hospital room with 2 bullet holes in my back and enough coke in my stomach to put down an adolescent elephant. That was what living fast got you. A hospital bed with handcuffs around your wrist. I laid in that bed for days. During that miserable portion of my life, I had time to think about what the fuck I was doing. Why was I there? Why had I gotten involved in that bullshit with Alexander? Running coke was one thing, but running people? Fuck me, I needed help and I needed it fast. So I cut a deal. Of course I did. What else was there for me to do? A federal agent with her hair in a bun, and the type of face that told me she would pistol whip my ass in a second if I pissed her off, had come into my room and sat in the chair opposite my bed. "Taylor Adams," she began, not reading from anything except my eyes. "Third strike. And buddy, this is a big one, isn't it?" "Yeah. This ain't selling pot under the freeway." "Who are you?" I said. "Special Agent Veronica Hill." "Special Agent?" "Uh-huh." She leaned forward. "Human trafficking usually gets a bit more attention than your run-of-the-mill narcotics bust, you know." I let my head fall into my pillow and sighed, staring up at the ceiling. I was fucked. I knew the evidence they had on me was more than enough to ruin the rest of my life. My fingerprints were everywhere at the docks. My near lifeless body was found curled up beside a boat with 15 Indonesian women tied up in the cargo hold. The captain was dead. Alexander was long gone. The undercover cop posing as a crew member was shot, but still breathing, and the only thing that couldn't be traced to me was the cash, because it was in Alexander's car. The cop knew that I was just muscle for Alexander, but muscle was more than enough. If he had died, maybe it would have been different for me. Unfortunately, he lived. I agreed to give them any and all info I had on Alexander. His address, the establishments he frequented, his close accomplices, his habits, his fucking sleep schedule. Everything. I also agreed to testify against him, should they ever catch his slippery ass. It was easy to supply all that information because no one knew Alexander better than I did. Which made sense. I was his brother after all. In return, I was given land in bumfuck nowhere and a monthly allowance to live off. I was Taylor Adams, and then I was Butt Lewis, pig farmer. You can call me a rat, you can call me scum. I don't care. What you can't call me is dead. And that, I do care about. I raised those pigs for a decade. I sold most, slaughtered some, and kept a few as pets over the years. My favorite was my girl Clementine. Clemmy was born in my 3rd year on the farm. When I pulled her from her mother, she hadn't been breathing. Just a little pink lump in my hands covered in blood and all sorts of vile shit. I pushed with 2 fingers into her little chest, pumping as hard as I could without killing her. I can't explain why, but I didn't want that particular pig to die. I used my shirt to wipe away as much of the birth residue as I could from her snout and put my lips to hers, filling her lungs and pushing on her chest, trying to do anything to keep the little girl alive. Her mother squealed behind me. As I was about to give up, she took a breath. She was my girl from that moment on. Clemmy was more than a pig to me, more than just livestock. I house-trained her, and she lived inside with me. Picture the best-behaved dog you've ever had, and now forget them, because trust me when I say, Clementine the pig was 10 times better than any mutt. She would sleep on my feet while I sat watching late-night TV and eating a shitty frozen dinner. My toes would quickly go numb under her weight. At her biggest, Clemmy tipped the scales at just above 300 pounds. But it did not bother me. At night, she would curl up in her bed beside mine and snore louder than all hell. I learned to deal with it though, because I loved her. Witness protection is great because they give you a house, money, a life. But what they don't give you is friends or family, and to make your own would violate the conditions of the program. So I was alone most of those first 3 years. Clementine came around and fixed all that. She became my best friend and fought away the darkness. And believe me when I say, there was darkness. I never had to testify against Alexander because he was never caught. Even with all the information I had provided the authorities, they had never been able to catch up to him. It seemed Alexander Adams was always just one step ahead. I knew Alexander, though. I knew that even with all the cash he had, it would never be enough. Because with Alex, although he would never admit it, he didn't care about the money. The copious amounts of green was always just a bonus. The truth is, Alexander liked being bad. He enjoyed it. He was damn well good at it, too. He liked slinging dope. He liked lending money and breaking knees when that money wasn't paid back. He liked hurting people. He liked selling them, too. I'm not going to sit on some imaginary high horse and claim to be any better than my big brother, because I'm not. I was right there beside him, slinging rocks and busting heads. When he brokered the purchase of those women, I had been sitting at that same table, my eyes watching the shifty fuck across from me while my mind focused on the gun in my waistband. I had driven Alexander to the docks. I had been right there when the buyer showed up with the money. I had laughed right alongside the captain and Alexander as Alexander poked fun at the ugly Cadillac they drove. I'm not a messiah, is what I'm saying. No saint. But I can say with absolute certainty that I hated myself for what I was doing. When we first got there and Alexander wanted to check what he called the merchandise, I had to wait outside. To sell those women was one thing, but to look them in the eyes was another. I was a criminal, but I was also a coward. When the cops stormed the place, the lead buyer drew a pistol. I drew mine too. He fired twice and the captain and his sneaky first mate went down. I fired and hit him in the arm. He went down screaming. Before I could react, the buyer's bodyguard, a big piece of shit with greased hair and an Armani suit, drew on me. 2 explosions later and I was on the ground bleeding. The sound of a helicopter overhead, the flashing of red and blue lights in the puddles of water beside my head, the shouts of officers and the blaring of megaphones. I saw the buyer and his bodyguard get arrested. I saw them come for me. I saw Alexander look back, see me dying, and continue to run to his car with his briefcase in his hands. My point is, I was a bad person, but I never enjoyed being a bad person. I only enjoyed the lifestyle that horrendous shit afforded me. Alex, however, made being bad the lifestyle, and he enjoyed every second of it. I never forgot how he left me there, and he never forgot how I ratted him out. When Clemmy was 4 and I was in my 7th year on the farm, Alexander found me. I was slopping the pigs, dick deep in shit and piss and mud, when I heard the rumble of a car from the dirt lane that snaked away from the farm into the trees at the edge of the property. I finished dumping their food into the trough and walked away from the screaming things, through their disgusting gunk. I leaned against the fence, spit, and crossed my arms, the empty slop bucket dangling limply from my hands. My first year there, and the sound of an engine would have concerned me. 7 years in, though, and not even the agents visited me anymore. I was expecting it to just be someone from town looking for some pork, or maybe an early delivery, as I had ordered some supplies for the next week. Before I saw the vehicle, though, I knew it wasn't either of those. Around those parts, people just didn't drive cars that sounded like that. They drove pickups and old beaters. This engine was smooth and quiet. A jet black BMW came around the bend and I started to worry. My thoughts raced, but none of them were correct. I worried because I thought it was my handler. Veronica never showed up in person, instead communicating over phone or email. She was the only person I could think of that would drive a car like that and want to visit me. For her to make a special trip, I was worried that she was going to tell me they caught Alexander, and that I was being called on to fulfill my end of the deal. Thinking back, I really wish that had been the case. Instead, when the car stopped and the door opened, I was greeted by the smiling face of my big brother. "Look at this shit," he said, leaning against the car, elbow against the roof. I was speechless. The bucket dropped from my hands with a bang as it bounced off the wooden fence. Alexander laughed. He had aged much more gracefully than I had, but I guess that made sense considering the life I was living. His previously black hair was now a suave-looking salt and pepper, and his chiseled chin had grown a thin layer of white fuzz. He still wore an expensive suit and a gold watch that was probably worth more than the car. He removed his sunglasses. "I never thought you'd be the farming type, little brother. Then again, I never thought you'd be a rat, either." I swallowed hard. Behind me, pigs squealed. Sunlight beamed. I had no choice. "Sure you did," Alexander said as he started walking up the drive, dragging his heels and kicking up dust, one hand in his jacket pocket and the other waving in the air, enunciating his words. You could have kept quiet and, like a man, did your time. I would have taken good care of you, you know that. He continued. Or you could have just died. Now, that would have been less preferable to me than prison, but much more so than ratting. You left me, I said, and stepped back from the railing. What else could I have done? I'm not a doctor, little brother, and I'm not sure if you remember, but you were pretty fucked up. I looked around with just my eyes. My house was 100 yards behind him. The barn about 20 feet to my left. Around me, pigs. I could see Clementine sleeping up on the porch, and I hoped that whatever happened to me, Alexander wouldn't hurt her. How do you find me? I said. Your buddy Agent Hill. What? Oh, don't panic. She ain't dirty. Trust me on that. I tried. She is dead, though. I promised her I'd stop cutting, should she tell me where you were. I'm a man of my word, Taylor. Oh, sorry. Buck. I stepped back again and felt the hefty weight of a hog bang into the back of my knees. The pig squealed at me but didn't budge as he continued to eat his dinner. Alexander reached the fence and leaned cross-armed on it. I should probably cut to the chase, little brother. I'm gonna kill you. Alex, nah, don't do that. Don't ask me not to. You fucked me, bud. It took me years to get everything back together. I had to travel across the fucking country. Living out of hotel rooms, never being able to set up an operation because everywhere I fucking went, they were there. Waiting. Because they knew me, right? They knew everything about me. I find no joy in 86 in my own brother. He continued as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small pearl-gripped folding knife and flicked it open with a quick jerk of his wrist. But you must know you deserve it. I acted as fast as I could. I knew that if I just stood there and listened, I would die. Hell, I would die either way, but I at least wanted to go out fighting. I bent low and scooped up a fistful of mud and pig shit and flung it at Alex, hitting him square in the face. He yelled and fell back from the fence, flailing his arms, swatting at his face and cursing. You son of a bitch! I turned and ran towards the barn, hopping the gate and making a go for the doors. My hand grabbed the metal loop, my fingers wrapped around it, hope filled me, but a hand grabbed hold of the collar of my work shirt and pulled me backwards. Luckily, I had already gripped the handle and I wasn't letting that son of a whore go. I remained on my feet and spun around just as he swung the blade underhanded towards my stomach. I dodged and spun away from him, knocking him off balance as I did. He cursed and stumbled, still half blind from the cake shit in his eyes. I saw my house and ran for it. Getting inside to my secret shotgun I kept under the kitchen floorboards was my goal. If I could get to that, I could win. Knife to a gunfight, right? I was running as fast as I could, my lungs pumping air, but then a shot rang out and I was on the ground, just like at the docks. A familiar burning resonated up from my lower back and I knew I had been shot. I was on my stomach, face first in the brown dirt of my driveway, unable to move. I heard heavy breathing and footsteps as Alexander got closer. Then, his shoes were on either side of me and his hands were on my shirt. He grunted and flipped me over onto my back. The pain was out of this world. Agony was too kind of a word for the fire spreading through my blood. He towered above me, brown streaks across his face, knife in one hand, pistol in the other. You really think, he panted, I would just bring a fucking knife? Alex, please, I said. I'm not proud, but yeah, I was ready to beg. Again, I didn't want to die. Shoveling pig shit wasn't the best life, but it was a life. Shut up, he said and dropped to his knees, mounting my chest. His weight on my ribs was horrible, each breath a fight, each exhale making the next inhale a bit shallower. He put the barrel of the gun against my forehead and I screamed as the heat of it branded my skin and spread the scent of burning flesh into the air. He placed the blade of his knife against my throat as he continued pressing the gun into me. I'm gonna fucking like this, little brother. Oh yeah. You ain't, though. I closed my eyes and tried to hide within myself from the pain. Soon it would be over. I just had to get past this last part. The fuck? Alexander said. I opened my eyes and he was staring towards my house, eyes wide and scared. I couldn't see what he was seeing. Taylor, what the fuck is that? Alexander said in the terrified voice of a petulant child. He stood and staggered back, pistol raised, hands shaking. From behind me I heard a horrible, mind-shattering squeal, like the death squeals of 1,000 hogs all at once. I felt it too. It reverberated in my bones, bounced off the walls of my chest, liquefied into my very hemoglobin. Alexander screamed, his knife and gun dropping to the dirt beside him, and pissed himself before trying to run. The sun was blotted out as something leapt over me, something the size of a fucking grizzly bear. It was over and past me in the time it took me to brace on an elbow and watch in horror at what happened next. A hog, the likes I had never seen before, was closing in on Alexander as he ran screaming towards his car. The thing was huge and pink with splotches of black here and there. The muscles under its skin were solid and defined and writhed as it bounded down on him. The thing's face was a twisted horrorscape of unnatural lines and indents, blood-red eyes, and teeth that could shred a Volkswagen. It caught Alexander and threw him against the side of his BMW, shattering the passenger window. His limp body fell to the ground and the pig lifted one humongous hoof and drove it through his soft stomach. Blood and intestines squirted out around the pig's leg, his lower digestive tract looping like a serpent in ringlets as it rose up. A bone-chilling scream erupted from my brother's throat as the pig lifted his leg again and Alex's body rose with it, stuck to the hoof. His body bent in the wrong way, his legs and upper body dangling backwards as he was lifted a few feet into the air and stomped back down. More innards erupted from his gut and a fountain of thick, mucousy blood splashed from between his teeth and pollocked the side of his expensive car. Alexander was softly weeping, his head turned to look at me, his mouth working up and down mindlessly, his chunky, swollen pink tongue lolling between his lips. The pig bent and grabbed his skull between her teeth and hoisted him into the air. As he hung, his stomach hole ripped open and the contents of his torso plopped to the ground beneath him with the sound of wet laundry splatting on the floor. A second later, the pig snapped its jaws closed and exploded Alex's head with a sickening crunch. His memories cascaded down in a shower of blood and chunks of skull. With Alexander dead, the pig turned and advanced on me. I still couldn't move, so I put my head back down and stared at the blue sky, waiting for it to finish me off. I closed my eyes. Something wet touched my face. Something familiar. I looked and was greeted by the moist pink snout of my best friend as she sniffed my face. Clementine snorted and nipped at my cheek, prodding me. I laughed at first, thinking I was in the midst of some sort of final hallucination, that as of right now the giant pig was ripping me to shreds. But a few moments more of Clemmy booping her nose against my cheek and I knew that I was alive. I started to wonder how that was possible and where the mutant hog had gone, when I saw the blood caked around her snout.